I enjoyed playing Resident Evil 2 Remake, but the cut stuff stops me from fully liking the original Resident Evil 2 is a better game in my mind. My favorite horror game as a kid is destroyed. My heart is broken. Why Capcom? It is almost undeniable that with every Resident Evil game released, fans get more aggressive against Capcom. This heavily applies to Resident Evil 3 Remake, certainly because of the huge amount of content cut from the game. With Resident Evil 4 being teased by 2 trailers, it brings up the question, how is it gonna look like? Is this gonna be a remake just like Resident Evil 3, or is it gonna be a faithful one? Resident Evil 4 to the majority of the fans was the start point of their Resident Evil experience because of its huge success, being reputed as the best Resident Evil and one of the best games ever created. They ruined my childhood game. This topic is what became famous after Resident Evil 2 Remake. 1998 was the year Resident Evil 2 was released, following the tradition of the first game, but better. However, 20 years later, the game received a remake by Capcom developers, which didn't satisfy the fans as it was expected to. Majority of the gamers who played the Resident Evil 2 remake played the Resident Evil 2 as well, stating it was the worst game they ever played. However, the same thing happened to Resident Evil 3 remake, being a certainly not faithful remake, cutting so much content that many believe it has to be remade once more. The existence of Resident Evil 4 was simply obvious, due to the leaks and rumors, and the amount of remasters the game received, and also the latest VR version. First off, Resident Evil 4 seems to have changed the atmosphere from brown to blue. The trailers, though, showed us everything that was remade directly. No reimagining was shown, but one thing that caught my attention is the name of the game, Resident Evil 4, not Resident Evil 4 Remake. This makes me wonder if Resident Evil's franchise is planned to be rebooted. Recently, the previous Resident Evil games received an update, enhancing the visuals and the textures. So this brings up the question, are they gonna change the name of the previous games as well? Are they gonna have the whole franchise rebooted? Stick till the end to find out.
Ladies and gentlemen, Resident Evil 3 Remake is not good.
Evil 3 Remake is a bad game. It's bad. And you know, please just acknowledge that it's bad. Everybody keeps calling this game about disappointing following. The game fucking sucks and the original was better.
Up until Resident Evil 6, the one thing that the franchise was suffering from was irrelevancy, and this appeared in the franchise after Resident Evil 3. Resident Evil 1 was a slow-paced game with survival horror elements. Resident Evil 2 was the same thing as well, but after Resident Evil 3, everything started to feel a bit action-oriented. Resident Evil 4 was the point that everything changed for almost a decade. It was the point that the franchise was starting to feel far from its roots. Moving on to Resident Evil 5. The game is high quality, but still far from the roots. By releasing Resident Evil 6, the developers went full action on Resident Evil because they believed that Resident Evil is small for horror community because of the success of their rivals in action category, such as Gears of War and Call of Duty. That is why you see Resident Evil 6 is so much action-oriented. With Resident Evil 7, they finally returned to the roots and came up with the idea of sticking to the formulas. That is why since Resident Evil 7, the only mainline Resident Evil we got was Resident Evil Village. They tried reconnecting the franchise to the older games by remaking the originals, Resident Evil 2, 3, and now 4. But here's the deal. Resident Evil 1 Remake was released back in 2002, meaning the developers could actually remake Resident Evil 2 faithfully as well, but instead, they reimagined the game. And the same goes for Resident Evil 3. Many fans are complaining, why were the games remade that way? Couldn't they remake the games like Resident Evil 1? The answer is yes. They obviously could, but instead, they tried somehow rebooting it. Now take a look at it this way. Resident Evil is a 20-year-old franchise, and it has always been there for survival horror. But to keep the franchise going on, they have to stick to the formulas that'll always work. Like in this case, Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4. If you don't want your games to feel like a copy and paste, you have to change some stuff in it. So that is what happened to Resident Evil 2, 3, and now 4. Resident Evil 4's trailers showed us everything directly remade from the original, like the handguns, characters, and more. So far so good, but you need to keep this in mind. At the end, it was written Resident Evil 4, not Resident Evil 4 Remake. So you might be wondering, what does that mean? Long story short, Capcom is rebooting the franchise. And I even feel like they will remake Resident Evil 1 once more to change the story a little bit, to fit the storyline of the newly remade games. Resident Evil 2 was changed, 3 was changed, and now 4 is going to change. For instance, Lewis is gonna mutate, Krauser is no longer in the game, Wesker is a boss fight, and Sadler's final boss fight will have 2 phases. So they are throwing the old Resident Evil games away by not writing the word remake. It's mentioned that when Resident Evil 4 is released, Resident Evil 2 Remake will receive an update, a document basically, that gives Leon the mission brief of Resident Evil 4, saving the president's daughter. See, it's easy now to release updates for all their games. I even feel like they will remove the word remake from RE2 and 3, and they will replace the OG games. So you might be wondering, what is going to happen to the rest of the series? Are RE5 and 6 getting a remake as well? I would say yes if you ask me, and I have reasons for it. Resident Evil 5 is one of the best sold RE games out there, and 6 was going to be the best RE game by having 3 main storylines. And now Resident Evil 1, 0, 5, and 6 are the only remake-worthy games for Capcom in terms of money that aren't yet on RE Engine. However, the only way to make the franchise is to reboot the controversial games, in this case RE4, 5, and 6. With all that being said, the only proper word for the games is Reborn, not remake, reimagine, nor reboot. My only guess would be Resident Evil 1 Reborn, RE5 Remake, and 6 Remake. After all, Resident Evil is a successful franchise when it comes to games, and I always appreciate the work the developers do. Resident Evil has always brought me joy and happiness, and as a hardcore fan, I will play and respect every game they release. Correction, except with this one. So, that'll do it for this video. Make sure to comment down your thoughts on this topic. And if you have come so far and enjoyed this video, then make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I'm a Raccoon City survivor, and as always, thanks for watching.